All right, let's dive into this whole methylene blue thing. I know you're probably thinking, okay, another molecule, what's the big deal? But trust me on this. Methylene blue, it's kind of like that friend who's surprisingly good at everything. You know, it's been around forever, treating malaria, but suddenly, bam, it's showing up in brain research, cancer studies, even COVID treatments. I mean, you got acne, nail fungus, methylene blues in the case. So what we're going to do today, we're going to cut through the hype, see what the real science says about this little blue wonder drug. It's actually kind of wild. One of the things that blew my mind, way back in the 1800s, this guy Paul Ehrlich, a total pioneer in chemo, he was already using methylene blue to like stain tissues, figure out how cells worked. It's like right there, you can see why this stuff is so versatile.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there. Methylene blue, it's all about how it handles electrons. Like it's playing hot potato with them. This means it can basically shapeshift, interact with tons of different molecules in our bodies. And here's the kicker. Methylene blue, it can waltz right through the blood-brain barrier.
Whoa, back up a sec. For those of us who didn't, get a PhD in neuroscience, what's this barrier thing?
Think of it like the brain's super exclusive nightclub. Most molecules, they're stuck outside, can't get in, but methylene blue, VIP pass, goes straight to the brain cells, which is huge if you're trying to treat something like, say, Alzheimer's or even PTSD.
Makes sense. So it's not just hanging out in the bloodstream. What's it actually doing in those brain cells that I was reading about this whole neuroprotective thing? Sounds like it helps brain cells stay healthy longer.
Bingo. One of methylene blue's tricks is it boosts these little power plants inside cells, mitochondria. Like, imagine your brain cells getting dim, running out of juice. Methylene blue cranks up the energy, keeps things running smooth.
And I remember this study, PTSD patients, they were actually learning to cope with trauma better, right?
Exactly. It's all about extinction learning. Basically, rewiring the brain's response to bad memories. Less fear, less trigger happy, kind of like, teaching a dog to chill out when the mailman comes, but for your trauma.
That's wow. Okay, so we got brain power boost, trauma help. What about Alzheimer's? I know there's been some buzz about that too.
There has, but it's a bumpy road. You know how research goes. Some early studies, small groups, things looked amazing, memory improvements. But then, bigger trial, not so much. Shows you how tricky it is. What works in a small scale doesn't always hold up. Alzheimer's is a complicated beast. Lots to figure out still.
So not a silver bullet, but still potential there. Okay, now this is where things get really sci-fi. Methylene blue, it can help surgeons actually see cancer during surgery. How crazy is that?
Pretty wild, right? It's got this neat trick. It glows under near-infrared light, like giving surgeons X-ray vision so they can see exactly where the tumor is, cut it out more precisely, spare healthy tissues.
So it's not just treating, it's like enhancing how they even do the treatment. Pretty amazing, but I gotta imagine, putting a dye inside your body, there's gotta be some risks.
You're not wrong. There's always a balance. In low dose of methylene blue, pretty safe track record. But injecting it, yeah, there's a chance of, say, tissue damage if it's not done right. Reminds us, even with cool new tech, gotta weigh the pros and cons carefully. Each patient's different.
For sure, no free lunches in medicine, as they say. Speaking of tough fights, methylene blue's story with infections is a comeback for the ages. It was almost benched as an antimalarial. Now it's being looked at for COVID.
What? Yep. And not just that, it seems to help with drug resistance and malaria, too, which is huge. That's a problem with so many infections. Some early COVID studies, pretty hopeful, shorter hospital stays. But like we said, more research needed. Always got to confirm those early wins.
Feels like methylene blue's a real contender in the infection game, especially with resistance on the rise. Now we've got a lot more to dig into. This photodynamic therapy thing sounds wild. And its role in cardiovascular health. There's a whole nother rabbit hole. So buckle up. We're going to dive even deeper in part 2. Right, welcome back to our methylene blue deep dive. I don't know about you, but I'm still kind of reeling from all the stuff we talked about. Brain power, fighting infections. It's like this molecule does it all. But before we jump into the rest, we got to circle back to that photodynamic therapy thing. PDT, you mentioned it. Sounded super cool, but I got to be honest, I need a little ELI 5 on that one.
Oh, absolutely. Happy to break it down. Imagine like a tiny flashlight, but it can zero in on specific cells in your body. That's kind of the gist of PDT. It uses light and this light-sensitive compound, which is where methylene blue comes in.
Okay, that's a start, but how does methylene blue actually work in this whole PDT thing?
So methylene blue, it's like a little energy sponge, soaks up light, then releases that energy. And with PDT, they use a special kind of light that activates the methylene blue, makes it generate these, Well, they're called reactive oxygen species, but think of them like tiny little bombs.
Whoa, okay, so we're talking like a targeted weapon inside the body activated by light? That's wild. But how do we make sure those little bombs only hit the bad guys, not the healthy cells?
That's the cool part. Methylene blue, it kind of likes to hang out in the messed up cells more, like cancer cells or infected ones. So you shine the light on the area, those little bombs mostly go off where the methylene blue is concentrated.
So it's like, what, a snapper rifle for cells, only taking out the bad ones. This is blowing my mind. So what kind of stuff can we actually treat with this methylene blue PDT then?
The list keeps growing. Researchers are always finding new uses. Skin cancer's one, certain types already being treated with PDT, even precancerous lesions, so stopping cancer before it really gets going, but it goes way beyond skin stuff too.
You mentioned acne and nail fungus earlier, right?
Yeah.
Those two.
Those two. For athletes that just won't quit, PDT can be a real game changer. And nail fungus, man, that's just a nightmare to get rid of. PDT's looking like a good alternative to all those pills.
I know people who've been battling nail fungus for years. I bet they're all ears on this. What else is on the horizon for methylene blue PDT? Any other exciting possibilities?
Well, remember how we talked about infections? PDT is being looked at for a whole bunch of those too. Bacteria, fungi, even viruses. It's like a broad spectrum weapon.
That's huge, especially with antibiotic resistance being such a big deal these days. Feels like PDT could really shake things up in the infection world. But what about those risks we talked about? Is PDT itself considered a safe treatment?
Like anything medical, there's always got to be a careful look at the risks. Most common side effects are pretty mild, like some redness, maybe a bit of swelling where they treated. The key is it's got to be done by someone who knows what they're doing, a qualified healthcare pro, so they can weigh the risks and benefits for each patient, make sure it's the right call.
Makes sense. Can't just go shining lights on everything. Got to be smart about it. It really feels like methylene blue's having a moment, showing up everywhere in medicine. You mentioned cardiovascular stuff earlier. How does that even tie into all this?
Remember those little power plants we talked about, mitochondria? Well, how they're doing affects blood vessels too. Methylene blue can actually help blood flow, even regulate blood pressure. It's pretty wild.
So it's like a conductor for your heart and blood vessels, keeping everything in sync. This just keeps getting more amazing. But okay, before we get too carried away with all the good stuff, got to stay grounded. Earlier we mentioned how some of the Alzheimer's research hit a snag. Things didn't pan out quite like they hoped. So what are some of the challenges researchers are facing trying to unlock methylene blue's full potential?
Well, one of the big ones is just figuring out exactly how it works. At the nitty-gritty level, we know it messes with a lot of different cellular processes, but the devil's in the details. And our bodies, they're complicated machines. What works in a lab dish or a mouse doesn't always translate to people.
So there's still a lot of puzzle pieces to fit together before we can really unleash methylene blue's full power. But it sounds like researchers are making headway, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. And one of the most exciting areas is this whole nanotechnology thing. They're developing these teeny tiny particles, nanoparticles, and they can basically load them up with methylene blue and deliver it right where it needs to go in the body like a guided missile.
Wait, nanoparticles. So we're talking about basically creating tiny delivery systems that can take methylene blue straight to the target. That sounds like something straight out of Star Trek.
I know, right? But it's real. These nanoparticles, you can design them to recognize certain types of cells, cancer cells, for example, and then release the methylene blue right there.
So it's not just about the methylene blue itself, it's about getting smarter with how we use it, making it even more effective.
Exactly. Nanotechnology is opening up a whole new playbook for methylene blue and a ton of other treatments. It's like taking a good tool and making it laser focused.
This is all incredibly inspiring, I gotta say. It's like methylene blue is giving us a peek to the future of medicine.
I'm with you on that. It's a perfect example of how curiosity and sticking with it can lead to these amazing breakthroughs. Who would have thought a simple dye could hold so much potential for human health? It's amazing.
We've covered a lot of ground today, PDP, nanotech, the challenges, the opportunities. But there's one more thing I want to touch on before we wrap up, ethics. We talked a bit about the ethical side of using a molecule like this, but it's worth digging into.
Absolutely. Any powerful tool, you got to use it responsibly, right?
So what are some of the things we need to be thinking about as methylene blue becomes more and more common in medicine?
Well, for one, gotta watch out for the hype. It's easy to get carried away with the potential, but gotta remember, methylene blue's not a magic bullet. A lot of the research is still early days. Gotta be realistic. Can't overpromise.
Right, got to balance the excitement with scientific caution, make sure we're not getting ahead of ourselves.
Exactly. And also, got to think about unintended consequences. Like we said, methylene blue, it interacts with a lot of stuff in the body. We're still learning all the ins and outs. So as we develop more powerful treatments based on it, there's always a chance of side effects popping up, stuff we didn't see coming.
So it's not just about can we do this, it's should we? Got to proceed carefully.
You got it. And transparency is key. Got to keep those lines of communication open. Researchers, doctors, policymakers, everyone talking to each other about the ethical side of all this, making sure patient safety is always front and center.
Makes sense. Open communication builds trust, and that's crucial when you're talking about new medical stuff. Speaking of crucial, can't forget about access, right? We can't let methylene blue become one of those treatments that's only available to the rich and famous.
Couldn't agree more. We got to work hard to make sure everyone who needs these treatments can get them, no matter their background, no matter where they live. It means fixing problems in healthcare systems, pushing for affordable options, supporting research in places that don't have a lot of resources.
It's a big task, for sure, but it's got to be done. We can't let these advancements make the healthcare gap even wider.
Exactly. And just as important, got to keep investing in research and education. The more we understand about methylene blue, how it works, what it can do, what it might do that we don't want, the better we can develop treatments that are safe and effective.
Well said. It really feels like we're at the start of something big in medicine, and methylene blue is leading the charge. But as we get excited about all this, got to remember, with great power comes great responsibility. We got to be thoughtful, ethical, and always focused on what's best for everyone's health. All right, that brings us to the end of our methylene blue deep dive. Hope you enjoyed the ride. It's been a wild one, for sure.
It has. It's been a pleasure exploring this amazing molecule with you and all our listeners out there.
Remember, the journey of discovery never really ends. Keep asking questions, keep learning, keep exploring this crazy world of science and medicine. And until next time, stay curious. Welcome back for the final stretch of our methylene blue adventure. I gotta say, this has been a wild ride, from humble dye to potential medical superstar.
It really makes you wonder how many other hidden gems are out there, just waiting to be discovered.
Right, it's like we're just scratching the surface of what's possible. So we've talked about all the cool stuff methylene blue can do, but before we wrap up, gotta talk about the responsible side of things, the ethics.
Absolutely. It's not just about what we can do, it's about what we should do, right?
Exactly. So what kind of ethical stuff comes up with something like methylene blue, with all the potential?
Well, for starters, got to be careful about overhyping things. It's easy to get carried away, miracle cure and all that. But got to remember, methylene blue is not magic. A lot of the research is still pretty early. We need more data, more studies before we make any grand pronouncements.
Right, like, I'm excited about the possibilities, but gotta temper that with some realism, right?
Totally. And we also got to be on the lookout for unintended consequences. Methylene blue interacts with a lot of different things in the body. We're still figuring out all the domino effects. So as we develop these new treatments, there's always a chance of, side effects we didn't anticipate.
So it's not just about, hey, cool, we can do this. It's also, hold on, what else might happen? Gotta be cautious.
Exactly. And that's why communication is so important. Everyone involved, the researchers, the doctors, the people making policies, they got to be talking to each other, sharing info, making sure patient safety is always the top priority.
Open communication, transparency, that's how you build trust, right? Especially when it comes to new medical stuff.
Absolutely. Got to have that trust.
And can't forget about access either. We gotta make sure these methylene blue treatments don't just become some luxury thing only available to the few.
That's a big one. We need to make sure everyone who could benefit from these treatments can actually get them, regardless of, their income, where they live.
It's like, what's the point of all this amazing progress if it only helps a select few? That's not right.
Exactly. We got to work to fix those inequalities, advocate for fair pricing, support research in places that need it most.
It's a challenge, but it's a challenge we have to tackle.
Couldn't agree more. And just as important, got to keep the research going, keep learning, keep educating people. The more we understand about methylene blue, the better equipped we'll be to use it safely and effectively.
It feels like we're at the beginning of something truly revolutionary in medicine, and methylene blue's right at the forefront.
It's exciting, isn't it? This little molecule. Who knew it held so much potential?
But like you said earlier, it's not just about what we can do, it's about how we do it. We got to be thoughtful, ethical, and always put people's health first. All right, well, that wraps up our deep dive into the world of methylene blue. It's been a fascinating journey. I don't know about you, but my mind is officially blown.
Me too. It's been a real pleasure exploring all this with you and all our listeners.
And remember, the learning never stops. Keep that curiosity burning, keep asking questions, keep digging deeper. Until next time, stay curious, everyone.